Hey friends, welcome back to a new video, and in this video we're going to build a timer app using shared preferences. If you're new to shared preferences or you need a refresher guide, I released an ultimate beginner's guide to shared preferences in Flutter. Go ahead and have a look. So in this specific video, as we're building our timer app, you're going to see the importance of shared preferences, and one of the use cases is managing app state. In our ultimate beginner's guide, we got to see the use case where it handles or allows us to save user preferences for users or for our specific app users. So in this specific video, we're going to have a look at how to manage app state and be able to save where the user has left off from the previous state when the moment they close the app and the moment when they open it. It's quite simple. So let's head over to our terminal and we'll create a simple application called the timer app. Then we'll head over to a new terminal and install our shared preferences package by running flutter create pub add shared preferences. Then let's proceed to our main.dat. Inside our main.dat, we have a simple main app class. So we'll just proceed to install, create a simple variable that will handle our shared preference instance. So we'll come here and call the widgets flutter binding dot ensure initialized, and then we're going to define a simple variable of type shared preference is equals to, so we'll need to set this to async because we need to wait for this to be initialized. So we'll just call shared preference dot get instance. Okay, now that we have that, we'll proceed to, we need to use this within the whole application, right? So there's a way I've explained in the beginner's guide how to do it, and this is just another way that I am sharing. So we'll head over to our lib folder and we'll create a simple repository class. Inside this repository class, we'll get to handle all the operations that are involved in our shared preferences. So we'll start by creating a class and call it shared preference repository. And before we proceed, we'll need to create a simple adapter that will be our abstract class, adapter.dart. All we're just doing, we want to design what we want to handle in terms of methods. So we'll just have an abstract class and we'll name it shared preference adapter. And inside here, we're just pointing out the type of methods that we want to initialize or interact with or create a logic for them. So the thing with abstraction is you're hiding the true information or the logic of these specific methods. Now these methods, once we extend it in our repository, we'll get to add the logic that we want to use based on the specific method. So we'll get to see that. So I'll have the first method as set key value and we'll give it a type, a generic type, and then we'll proceed to say string because the key has to be of type string, and then t value because in this case we may have a different type we may have a different type of primitive type that we are setting here. So it could be an int, it could be a string, it could be a boolean or a string list. Next we'll have another method get value, and what will be returned is of type t, and then we'll proceed to pass in the key. Next thing we'll have is the, let's see, sorry about that. So the next thing we're going to have is future, and for future we're going to return of type of bool. This is what this method will be about, is we're going to remove a specific key, so we need to pass the key as an argument. Then lastly, we're going to have a method called empty that will allow us to empty our shared preference. So let's add that. Now we have this. Let's proceed to our repository and extend our adapter. So we'll proceed to add all our missing methods. So let's just do that. So we'll just say create. So it will create for us. Now it's our job to actually add logic inside here. So let's start by doing that. So for empty, all we have to do is clear the shared preferences, but now we need to get that instance, right? So to get the instance, all we have to do is define a variable called shared preferences of type shared preferences called prefs, and then we'll end up having a constructor, a private one, this dot prefs. Then before we proceed, we'll end up define another variable of the type of this class. So it will be shared preferences, and we'll give it the name instance. And then we'll have a getter that will allow us to get the instance from the main.dat. Let's see. Yeah, let's just set it as not nullable. So we'll have that, and then now we want to be able to have a setter as well. Be able to get the instance of a shared preference and also set it. Set shared preferences. We expect a variable of type shared preferences to be passed. And then now we initialize our variable instance with that. Repository, and pass it the pref, this one that has been passed. So now in this process, what we'll head over to main.dat. Now that we have created that, we defined, or we executed or called the get instance method. So what we want to do, we want to proceed to make sure that it's available throughout the app by just calling our repository over here, and then we call the setter, the method that we designed, and just pass in whatever this variable that we have initialized. That's all we're doing, so that we get to use it throughout our various methods that were overridden from the abstract class. I hope that makes sense. So now that we've done that, we're done with this part. Let's now finish up. The abstract class is simply done. Those are the main methods that we'll interact with. So just a minute before I close that. So we have the set, which is creating, get, which is reading, edit is equivalent to creating, setting. So if you want to update a value, you just set the key again, now with the new value that you want. And then we have remove, which is deleting. So we are interacting with the CRUD operations, and empty is just a way of clearing the shared preference itself, the instance. Okay, now let's work on our repository. So now that we have our shared preference instance initialized and we have the variable itself, so we'll proceed to work on the empty method. So all our empty method will do, we'll just call the prefs dot clear, and that we are done. So for our get, what we need to do is we'll do a few checks using a switch case. So we'll proceed to say switch of type T. So we want to handle all types of primitive types that are there. And the beauty of this for you, in case you want to implement shared preferences in your application, you just need to pick this repository class and inject it in your application, and then you end up interacting with it. So you find with this, the logic that I've created here, you can just pick the class as is, put it in your project, and then proceed to work with it. So I've just created a template of some sort. Okay, so now when we have switch, we do a case. If it's a string, we'll proceed to return prefs dot get string, okay, as t. Now let's add the rest. We have case int get int, then we have double as t, then we have bool as t, then we have list as t, and lastly we have the default case where we'll get to throw an exception, no implementation, get for t dot run type. So we're done with our get value. Now let's work on the next one, which is remove key. So for remove key, all we have to do is do a return and call our instance. We'll need an async await operation for this, dot remove, and then we specify the key, and we are done. Now the last one, which is set key value. For set key value, we proceed to use a switch case so that we get to handle all our primitive types. So we'll have type, the generic type, type t, and then let's start with case string. So we'll call the instance dot set string. So we'll have the key and then the value as string. There we have it. Next we have int. So we'll proceed to call the instance set int, and then we set the value as int. Next is double prefs dot set double, value as double, case bool pref set bool, value as bool, case list prefs dot set string list, value as list of type string. And then we'll have our default case, and we'll proceed to return the same thing. There we have it. So we are done with our repository class, and this is the one that we're going to interact with when we are designing our user interface. Great. So back to our main.dart. So we'll start working on our material app. So I'll create a simple class called timer, new file, and call it timer dot dart. And then I'll create a stateful widget or a state class and call it timer page. And then we'll just return a scaffold first so that we get to see up. Then I'll just proceed to remove the home and just call the timer page. So let's run this and see how it looks. So there we have our screen and it's blank. So now let's work on our timer page. So where will we start? We'll have a safe area. Just remove the const. We'll have a safe area and then we'll proceed to define a child, which will be a container. So we just want to manage everything inside the size of the screen. So I'll just specify the width and the height. Let's set some aesthetics to the container. So I'll just define a gradient. And the colors will be okay. The next thing will be, let's define a stop. Also, let's define begin, bottom center, and end top center. Great. Now let's work on the next thing, which is the child to the container, and that will be a column. Let's define the children. So our first child will be a text widget and we'll call it timer. Then I'll just style it. And we'll have a font size 24 and set the font weight. Great. Next thing we'll have is we'll have a central container that will be showing the time. When the user clicks on start, the time starts moving in seconds. So we want to display that time in terms of hours, minutes, and seconds. So we'll display it over there. So what we're going to do is define a container here. Define the width. And the height. Let's design it and give it a color and a shape. So you want a circular shape, and then we want a color, colors.amber. Good. Now after that, we'll proceed to create a child, which will be a text widget that will be holding the time, the hours and minutes and the seconds. So I think that's where we should, well, that's what we should work on now. So where do we I'll just proceed to come here and set the, or better yet, let me just set a static value here first, and then we can start working on the logic, the various functions that will allow us to handle this. And then we get to see where shared preferences comes in. So for now, let's let it stay like that. But for us to proceed, let's now work on the functions that we need. Okay. So the first function that we'll have is the one that will start the timer. So let's give it a name of type void start timer. And we're going to define a variable here of type timer. You can find it on in this specific package. This is on the who has this class of type of the timer class, that is. So we'll give it a variable name of timer, and then I'll proceed to initialize it. So what I'll say is timer is equals to timer dot. There is a method called periodic, and then we're going to define the duration and specify the seconds after every 1 second, and then we need to do a return. We need to add some logic here, and the logic will be where we have set the value as 30, we need to give it a variable, right? So let me just give it a variable here, int seconds is equals to 0. This is what's supposed to be over here. Because it's an int, then it stay like that. So we should see 0 on our screen. Okay, now let's proceed. So after every second, we need to update the state of this variable and add it by 1. So that's all we are doing. Okay, so we have the starter time. Next thing we need is a load function. So when the user starts and decides to close the app or decides to pause, we want to be able to save that app state so that when they come back to the app, they're able to proceed. If they had stopped at 25 minutes and they close the app, when they come back, they can proceed to from 25. It won't restart. That's just a way of showing how shared preferences can be used for managing app state. Okay, so we'll create a simple function called load saved time. And once we have load saved time, which is more of like getting the value from shared preference, and then we have saved time, which more or less is like storing information into the shared preference. So let's start with that one first. So we'll head over to our shared preference repository class, call the instance, and then proceed to set the key value. And our key here, we can define it as, instead of writing a string here, let me just define a simple key is equals to, let me just give timer key is equals to, let me just say timer and then this is what I'll proceed to set over here, and then whatever will pass here is the seconds. Okay, so that's all we're going to do, and then we're going to add a few set states, but let's first do this part as well. In this method, we are loading saved item. That means we want to get whatever is in the shared preference. So we'll define a simple variable of type int called saved seconds is equals to, we call our repository class and call the instance and call the method get value and pass in our timer key. So that's all we are doing, and then now after that we'll just do a check. If the saved seconds is not equal to null, that's when we proceed to set state on our variable seconds is equals to saved seconds. So there we have it. So we have a function that starts the time, that loads the time from the shared preferences, that saves the time. And now what's happening is from the starter time, we are going to be, what will be returned will be seconds. So we want to format that to hours, minutes, and seconds. So let's create another function for that. I will just call it format time. And then we get the time, which is int total seconds. So we want hours. So int hours is equals to total seconds by 3600, and then let's do the rest as is. So we'll have hours, minutes. We'll have a variable that will pick the remaining seconds is equals to the total seconds and get the modulus with using 3600, and then the minutes will be the remaining seconds, sorry, by 60. 1 hour is equals to 3600 seconds, 1 minute is equals to 60 seconds. So that's what we're doing, and then the seconds will be the remaining seconds, then you get the modulus 60. So that's that, and then next thing we're going to do now, we're going to format this, and we're going to define a string that represents the hours in by string is equals to hours dot to string dot pad. What I'm doing is right now when we display this part, it will, if it's 1 hour 12 minutes and 36 seconds, we want, so our 12 minutes and our 36 seconds are in 2 digits each, but our 1 will come in as a 1 digit, but I want it to come in terms of 0, 1, 12, 36. So where there is only 1 digit, we want to pad it with a 0 at the front. So that's all that we're doing in this part. So I'll just do 2, 0. Same thing with this. I'm going to do it on the minutes and the seconds. So we'll have minutes, pad left to 0, then we'll have seconds, seconds. Great. And then now we get to return our value. So we'll return this value. Then we'll return this and this. So there we have it. So if we decide to use this straight to our text widget so that it can format whatever second, the number of seconds that are passed or set. Let's just delete this. Just set it in quotes, or better yet, before that, let me just call the method itself and then pass the seconds. So we're expecting this to return a type of value of type string. So there we have it. So it's working properly. So we're able to see hours, minutes, and seconds. Great. Now let's proceed to, we have our format time. We need to set the save time and load save time. But before we do that, let's add something else, which is clear. So you'll have a button that will allow the user to pause or to play or to cancel. So at the point of canceling, we'll just call a method, a function called clear. So we'll just call our repository class, call our instance, and call the method empty. That's the one that clears everything in our shared preference. Great. So now let's see where we need to put all this. So we'll proceed to call init state. And in our init state, we want to, on the moment the app loads, we start the timer. Let's first see how that looks. I'll need to refresh the app. So as you can see, the timer is working, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, so we're moving swiftly. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we have our values set. Okay, so now let's create our 2 buttons that will allow the user to interact with the timer, which is cancel or play or pause. I'll create a simple row widget after the container that will hold the 2 of this row children, and since the design will be the same, it will be around the button. Let's create a simple widget class for that. So I'll just define a class or a file called widget.dat, widgets.dat, and we'll proceed to define our class here that we'll get to reuse. So I'll define a stateless widget and name it round button. And inside our stateless, we're going to return a container. Let's define the width, and we want this width to be passed here as a props. So we'll just say final double size. So we'll just proceed to call size here. And set it as required. The next thing we'll have is the height as well, which will be the same because we're creating a rounded button, so the width and the height will be of the same. Then let's just define the decoration and give it a shape which will be circular. And then we're going to have a color which will pass it as a props. Just come here, set final color. Required this dot color. Great. And the next thing we'll do is add a child, which will be an icon button. So for on pressed, we'll also pass the logic as well. So let's define it. This is of type callback. And give it the name on pressed. and set it as a required props that should be passed. So that's what I'll pass here. Then for our icon, we are going to set an icon, but we also need it passed. So just set it here. So this is an icon data. Set it as required. Then we'll set the icon size to the size that's passed, 0.6. Define the color, colors.white, and on pressed. We already have that. That's okay. Okay, fine. So now let's call our buttons in our timer class. So we'll have our first round button on pressed. Let's just import it. Okay, so our first one will be on pressed. So on pressed, what we want, the first one will be a cancel. So we want to clear everything from the shared preference. So once the user clicks on that, we'll just call the method clear. And then we do a set state because we're just using the inbuilt state management. Next thing will be the color, amber, size 70, and lastly the icon will be icons.close. We need something else. Oh, there we have it. It's not positioned correctly, but we'll do that in a few. The next thing will be another round button. So for the size, it will also be 70. For the color, then we'll have on pressed. So this is where we get to save time. And we'll set the icon to be .pause. So there we have it. Let's just use our main axis alignment to create space around. That's better. So our time is still continuing, which is cool. So we've been able to use the save time. We've been able to use the clear. So what is pending? Load saved time. Okay. Got it. So before we do that one, I need to do a small check. So if currently the timer is moving, when we click on pause, it's supposed to save the time, right? But there are other few things that it's supposed to do. It's first when we click on pause, it's supposed to It's supposed to change the icon to play so that the user can be able to play back. Then 2 on pause, that means our timer has to pause as well. And at this point of pause, we'll be saving the data in our shared preference. So let's add that logic. So what I'm going to do here is on press save time, I need a check. I need like a boolean that will help me do this check. And I'll just call it bool paused is equals to false. And if this will make sense. So let's come here. So it's just a small check that I'm doing. If let's start with the icon first so that we see if it makes sense. So if it's actually paused, if it's not paused, no, I think the wording is on. That's wrong. Let me see. Play. So automatically it plays. So let's see. So if we're saying play is false, if it's false, that means it shouldn't be playing. That means we'll set the icons to pause. Else set the icons to play, arrow. Hope it makes sense. Okay, and then let's try something else. So we just removed the pause word here, which is okay. Then another check I'll do here is the same thing. If you're not playing it, that means it has been paused. We'll save the time. Else, if you're playing it, we'll just call the start time so that it can continue. The timer can continue. So that it is. So let me just check these two functions before we close. So when we click on start time, we also need to do another check. So we'll set our play as false, so it allows the user to pause it if you need to. Then we just do a set state. Yeah, because of the change of state that we're putting on this bool. Better yet, if I don't want to set this value every single time, so that's why we're not inserting it inside here. So let it stay just like that. And then for load saved time, what we want to do is proceed to our init state and then call it here. So we'll first load it before we call the time, we start the timer, so that it picks whatever is currently in the shared preference. So that's why we're using our load saved timer. And then for our save time, we also want to handle some checks. So first thing, if we decide to save time, we want to stop this timer. So for us to stop the timer, we need to call it and cancel. Okay, and then we need to set the play to true so that the user can click on the play button if they want to proceed. And then we just call the set state. Simple as that. And then what else? For clear, we also need to do the same. Clear, that means we need to cancel the timer. And then we set our play to true and just do a set state. And since we are resetting everything, we'll now reset the seconds to 0. Great. So let's try and refresh this and see if it works. So let's do a refresh. So it's the timer is still okay. The timer is starting because we have set it in init state. If I decide to pause it, as you can see, it's paused, right? And if I decide to cancel it, we start from afresh. So what I wanted to do, so let me click on play now. If I click on play, it starts again. So our timer is actually working. So it ends up picking whatever is in the shared preference, loads it, and then there's one thing we haven't done. So we have canceled, we have paused. I need to close this up and then we open it again. We see if it's actually going to load, open the app, having saved the app state to the value of the seconds to 12. So let's try that. And then let me restart it. So there we have it. It has picked whatever was in the shared preference, which was 12, and now it's just continuing with the timer. So that's how we've been able to create a simple app using shared preference. So the one thing I want to do, which is not involving shared preference, but let's just try and make our timer a little more fun. So I'll create another timer here. We want to create blinking effect just to show it's more by static. So this will take just a second. So I'll just create a simple function called start blinking. Void start blinking. And all I'm doing is I'll just create a simple timer here and call it blink timer. Then I'll come and use it here and initialize it. Define the duration. And then inside here, I need another value of type bool is visible. Let me change this. So we'll have a boolean of is visible, which is true. So I'll proceed to set it here and say set state is visible is equals to the opposite of the current value. So if it was true, change it to false. If it was false, change it to true. Let me now show you what I mean. So I'll use this, head over to our container. And over here at our color, just going to do a small check. So I'm going to say if it's visible, set the color to amber. I'll set the color to amber 300. Let's see, invalid const. There we have it. Colors. So if we save that, let me try and refresh this. So no effect. Let me see. Or start blinking. We haven't passed the start blinking function anywhere. So let me add that. So where we're going to add it is at the point of start timer. So I can add it over here. Then I just click on save. Let me just restart. And you can see our container is blinking. So that was just a small aesthetic without having to install a package or a plugin. We just want to show that effect that it's moving with the seconds. So it's just a simple aesthetics. But with that, I hope you have understood or gotten an idea of how to use shared preferences to manage your app state. So if I decide to, as you saw, we were able to close this app and open it, and it was able to proceed from the last state of the seconds or of the timer, or the information of the timer, where the last state that was for the seconds, for the the value in the text widget, and then it continues from there. And if we decide to stop again, pause again, it will do the same. So if we decide to pause, it will stop from there. And at this point in the shared preference, in the key called timer, it has saved this timer key with a value 0 hours, 1 minute, and 6 seconds. And if we decide to clear this, it will end up clearing everything in the shared preferences. So we are starting from afresh. So since we have cleared, let's try and close this up and open it again, and you get to see that. Get to see whether the shared preferences was cleared or not. So there we have it, and it has started again from, because seconds move quite fast, started again from 0. So I hope that makes sense. We've interacted with shared preferences, just showing one of the use cases, which are many. If you want to know more about the use cases, head over to the Ultimate Beginner's Guide. I get to explain in detail why to use shared preferences, why not to use it, or when not to use it and when to use it. Or some of the use cases that you can, some of the use cases that are conducive for using shared preferences, and those that are not. And in this case, in the Ultimate Beginner's Guide, we got to look at the being able to manage user preferences, and in this one we were able to see how to manage app state by creating a simple timer app. So with that, see you on the next one.